Get your caffeination on, people. It's time for science. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I never bothered going after any of his other videos. Like, after I did that one...
In addition, evolution has been proven, and that's enough for us to use it to fill in some gaps.
I was wrong! This video is amazing!
Like, we've covered everything. I've shown he doesn't understand evolution. He doesn't understand creation. He's saying things or observations which happened on his own view millions of years ago, which makes them pure speculation, not observation. And then he also admits that he has an evolution of the gaps faith, where he uses his faith in evolution to fill in the gaps in his knowledge, what he doesn't know.
Evolution of the gaps. I love it.
Like, he said all of that in one video. I'm like, I don't know where else we can go. I figure, like, that wraps it all up. I figure any other videos, you know, and I didn't want my channel to be one where I'm like, I'm going to debunk this atheist. I'm going to debunk this YouTube. Like, that's not what I want to do. Like, I view myself as being a teacher. If I can help people learn stuff, that's one thing. But, like, finding somebody with a bigger channel than me to attack so I can get views attacking them, it's just not my thing.
Sadly, it is my thing, but I try not to actually attack people.
Well, if you're going to do it well. Like I said, you know, I don't mind people trolling, but make it an art form.
Oh, no, I definitely do. If you ever get a chance, if you're willing, check it out. I try and be funny with what I do, but he's actually been ghosting me for a while. I'm sick. I messaged him like 2 months ago after I talked to you, I was like, hey, I talked to this man. How about you talk to me so I can get your story? I haven't heard a word from the guy.
Well, he's kind of a big deal. He's internet famous, so, you know, I'm sure he's being interviewed by Rolling Stone magazine right now. I actually got interviewed by Rolling Stone magazine last year. Weird. I never looked into whether that article got published. I need to do that. That's funny because it's true.
I'll have to go and try to find that.
Not to be fair, I was with Creation Today right now, so it wasn't because of a bit of orange. It was because I was with Eric Hoven's Creation Today that I got put in contact with them. So that was also a very interesting conversation. I did record it, but by the time we were done, I felt like we were at sort of such a personal conversation about the author that I thought, this isn't really stuff I want to just throw online for strangers. So it was a good conversation, and I hope it did him some good. I talked grammar. I'm a science teacher, not an English.
Fine. The reason I do the things I do is because I don't do math and all that. Mind if I ask
cool.
you to bring up the Tree of Life real fast?
Sure.
Yep. All right. I see the main line there, the one that's going straight up.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be at all reasonable to say that maybe, just like with the cabbages and all that, what if the one was separate from the cabbage? We know we have stuff like mega worms and stuff like that. What if the worms actually don't evolve into fish? They evolve separate like the cabbage do, further to the right.
Sorry, so you're suggesting that maybe instead of going from bacteria to worms and worms to fish, it should go bacteria to worms, bacteria to fish?
No, the worms would be separate from the main tree at all. So, you know how you got the cabbage all the way to the right there? You got that little diagonal line. What if the worms don't fit into the main evolutionary line and go more? Again, it's just a hypothesis, but it would explain the then we get really tiny bacteria and all that slowly evolve into the fish. Again, I could be wrong there, but I figured I'd run that by you as something that I just thought about while I was looking at it.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's always good to hypothesize and ask questions about these things. So definitely don't ever apologize for asking questions. But the problem with trying to hypothesize bacteria to fish without going through a worm stage is that it seems that you would have to pass through a worm stage in order to get to the fish. That's why it's in the order it's in, is that a worm has something of, like bacteria is single-celled. It's got one cell, it has no tissues, it has no organs. But in order to go from bacteria to fish, you need to add to it being multicellular. But in order to be multicellular, it seems that if you're going through, again, an unguided natural process, it would wind up with, at first, the simplest collection of multicellular interworking tissues that you could get, which is why, I mean, again, I have an earthworm up there, but from the normal evolutionary assumptions, the story would be something like a flatworm, something much smaller and simpler than an earthworm. Earthworms have more distinct organ systems, and so when I put earthworm up there, that was just to represent worm, not to actually represent the kind of worm we think would have evolved first. It would have been something more like a flatworm, which would have, again, not had a circulatory system and not had a nervous system, but would have just been a couple of different kinds of tissue, some for sort of a muscular contraction ability to cause itself to move, but also some kind of sensory input. Like some flatworms have little eye spots, so it would have had to develop that different kind of cell for being able to turn light into an electrical signal, but then also, I guess it would have to have some kind of, at least chemical system for turning that into behavior, which, sorry, I've been studying microorganisms for the past couple of weeks because I've been teaching on it. It's just, I'm trying to talk about it in a way that makes it sound simple, and I just
understand
can't.
what you're saying. It answers my question if it makes you feel any better. I have the understanding of, and to be fair, most of that was just because for some reason my brain completely forgot that there's more than just the ones that live in the dirt, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, the evolutionary story would have something that's probably just would live in water and do respiration through its skin in a very simple way, not with a respiratory system, but just allowing oxygen to sort of come from the water through, if it has an epidermal, whatever layer it's got on the outside, oxygen would just sort of be able to penetrate it. So it would have to be very, very small. Just like insects can only get so big because they don't have an organ for bringing oxygen in. They just have thin places in their exoskeleton that allows gas exchange to happen. And so if insects get too big, the distance between the outside world and the internal organs gets too big and they can't get oxygenated, and so they can't survive. So that first evolved kind of worm of whatever it was would have to be something that's small enough to just be able to do gas exchange with its environment without organs to do it. But then, to go from that to fish would be, the increase in organ systems so that it can respond to its environment better and propel itself through the water and, fish parts.
Wouldn't just a simpler fish help out with that problem then? Like, we don't need
Right. So, I mean, again, I've sort of created a simplification of the evolutionary tree. And I know that. I mean, as people try to call me out on me, like, that's a goldfish. That's a modern fish. They didn't evolve first. I'm like, no. Again, I just picked something that looked like a fish so that anyone looking at this would know, oh, that means fish.
Oh, yeah.
It's just a symbol. The earliest evolved fish would have been something that didn't have, it wouldn't have had actual bones. It would have been maybe a cartilaginous, jawless fish, some like a bottom feeder kind of thing where it didn't have to have complex moving mouth parts and an evolved skeletal system or even necessarily a spinal cord of any kind. It wouldn't have been a chordate at that point.
Category?
So I understand that.
Wouldn't a plankton fit that category, or is plankton not considered fish? Have I been watching too much SpongeBob?
Plankton? Yeah, no, the plankton on SpongeBob is a little more evolved than actual plankton. First of all, most plankton don't have their own computers or relationships with them in that sense. And most of them, well, at least I would say the majority don't have plans for global domination. So some of them do, admittedly.
But plankton don't count as fish. I just want to double check that.
If I'm not mistaken, plankton are actually a type of, they're like a bacteria plant combo where they're single-celled, but they form multicellular colonies of single cells that do photosynthesis. So if I'm remembering my plankton correctly. So I think technically they're a single-celled microbe, a unicellular organism. So that while they can build up into larger structures, it's actually a colony. It's not an organism.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Which is fascinating. I mean, the fact that certain things have the genetic information that even though they are unicellular, when they create colonies, they change their behavior and start creating what look like large-scale structures. Like certain types of seaweed look like they have leaves and stems, but they're actually colonies of single-celled organisms, which biofilms do this too, like infectious biofilms. I used to do social media marketing and various types of education in molecular diagnostics. So bacteria, when we think about bacteria as an individual bacteria, like the picture that I've got up there, that is the planktonic state, meaning that it's just living on its own. Whereas when bacteria reproduce and to the point where there's enough of them in an environment where they have a colony building, they do what's called quorum sensing, where they share a chemical, and when they receive back enough of that, they know, and I use the word know, they respond to it, to having grown their population large enough that they change their behavior because of the size of it. And so the way that bacteria act in a colony is different than they act in the planktonic single bacteria state. But also, they can develop what's called a biofilm, which is a combination of different species of bacteria and sometimes fungi living together. And they respond differently to quorum sensing, so they send out chemical signals that they can receive and respond to. And when the biofilm is big enough, they start laying, because a biofilm, I mean, for us, it's just like, a fraction of an inch square. It's just, a little postage-sized stamp blob of something in wherever it's growing. But to them, that's like a county. Like, on their scale, it's enormous, and it's millions and millions of them. So one of the things that we've just learned they do is that bacteria can lay down nanowires outside of themselves across the biofilm so that they can communicate with electrical impulses. Because quorum sensing is chemical, but it takes a long time for the chemicals to get spread throughout the entire biofilm so that everybody receives and responds. Whereas electrical signals are much faster, so that the entire community in the biofilm, like if there's some kind of threat, they can all be sort of alerted and told to respond together at the same time. So microbes can make their own internet. Like, we just learned that, and I'm like, which is why, again, I'm trying to describe single cell things as simple, and I'm like, no, they invented the internet before we did. It's just, I love that. I'm like, oh my gosh, bacteria can make their own internet. They communicate through electrical signals on wires that they set up to create a grid so that the whole community can receive messages together. And we think we're smart because we had AOL. I'm like,
maybe all plankton are secretly just like plankton.
Right. They might be. I would not doubt it. But again, this is one of those things, like, having discovered that, I'm like, this is not secret knowledge. It's just that we know this about them, and yet there's still people who want to say, well, this evolved somehow. Like, a single cell that's able to communicate and to create different forms of behavior based on the size of its population, and then to lay down an electrical wire grid to communicate via electrical signals, that just fell together by accident. I don't care how long you think there is. That to me just strains credulity to the point where atheism just seems absurd beyond rationality at that point. Like, clearly this is the result of an intelligent designer who made these things. And again, we need them. It's not just like, well, these are the things that are just grow in dirt and they're a nuisance. We need them to survive. Like, our intestines are lined with these kind of communities that help us by creating certain types of, they process certain types of vitamins that our bodies can't make on their own, so that we have this symbiotic relationship with them that allow us to survive. And, they're part of our immune system, technically. That every part of us has its own microbiome that keeps, invading microbes off, so that the bacteria we've got on and in us keep us healthy. And they're these fascinating little machines that are doing all that work. Like, and in every ecosystem, like, plants only are capable of surviving because they have symbiotic relationships with the fungi and bacteria in the soil. Like, just on and on. Like, just clear design at every level, and genius design. So,
it's fine. No,
that was get excited. But man, science is cool. And I cannot separate the knowledge of science, these things that we keep discovering, from the clear fingerprints of God and reasons why we should be in awe of him. So, there's more than one reason I'm a creationist, and this is part
I didn't even
of
know about that about the plankton.
Right, that's new. I mean, every day we're discovering new stuff. Like, I was working for a company helping train their salespeople and do marketing for a molecular diagnostics company for a couple of years before we even found that. And that's stuff that is just from the past couple of years. It's partially just the improvement in technology. Like, our ability to look into the microscopic world just keeps getting better. Where, like, things 20 years ago we could never see. Like, we've just taken our first pictures of what DNA looks like when it's in a cell, which is something we had to just sort of take good guesses at based on, the 60s and 70s technology that we first, learned about the double helix, which itself is fascinating that we were capable of doing that. I mean, the things that people did in the 50s and 60s, like I tend to forget how innovative people were at the beginning of last century. But we're able to see so much more, and our ability to read and process genetics, like the Human Genome Project took 15 years to just sequence one human genome to get that information. Now your genome can be sequenced in less than 24 hours. And for, a couple $1,000 at most if your insurance doesn't cover it. So we've taken a 15-year process and condensed it into 24 hours or less. And that's just from the 90s until now. So we keep learning stuff, and it's just amazing. This is why I teach science. Because I get excited about science nerd stuff like that. I'm like, it's where I belong.
I know it's interesting. Again, there's a reason why I do what I do as well. I like hearing new stuff that I didn't otherwise know. It's fun, and a lot of that stuff, new stuff that I hadn't even thought about. So, yeah, for those people who are,
right?
I'm sure going to be in the comment section complaining about me, whatever I said and all that. This is why I do it again. I like to hear what people have to say. I'm sorry, I had to let that know to the two people who just couldn't seem to get it last time. I'm sure you saw that thread.
You know what? Never apologize to the trolls. You're a man who likes learning. Never apologize.
No, I wasn't apologizing to them. They earned what happened there, but just so at this time when they see it, they know I'm doing this specifically because I want to hear what you have to say. More specifically because I have stuff I have to say this time too, but this is to exchange ideas.
Amen. Well, along those lines, we are running to the end of our time. What else do you want to throw at me, or ask me, or whatnot? What have you got before we run out of time?
I was told that if it came up, and it did kind of did with the evolution thing, to point out that evolution, that people who believe in evolution and all that, don't specifically say stuff comes from rock. What would your rebuttal to that be?
Well, I get why they say that. I mean, the thing is, in a real strict technical sense, Darwinian evolution is what is the unguided natural process that living things would undergo to change from one kind to the other. So I appreciate the fact that in a way of defining, well, what Darwinian evolution is, rocks can't be part of that, and none of the proposed chemical evolution from rocks to the first living cell can be part of that. But the problem is I find that a lot of people want to sort of stick to that as, well, I refuse to talk about any of that because it's so, again, it's so immediately, obviously absurd to think that whatever minerals or substances are floating around in the prebiotic soup could just combine themselves into even a single functional organelle, let alone an entire living cell. It's just so obviously ridiculous to think that that kind of improbability could just happen without intelligent guidance and intervention, that if you start the conversation by acknowledging that your evolutionary story has this component where first the earth, forms this molten ball of rock and, lava that gradually cooled until it had a surface, and then water fell from space, and so there were oceans, and it rained on the rocks for millions of years, and it turned into soup, and the soup came alive. I get why you want to avoid that, and technically I understand that the process of Darwinian evolution happens to living things, not to chemical systems, but either you're saying that God directed the evolutionary process to create that first living cell, or you're saying that nature did, and according to the Big Bang cosmology and normal secular history of the world, that's how it works, is that rocks fell together because of gravity. The impacts caused them to heat up until it was just, liquid hot magma surface. It gradually cooled. Comets brought water. The water eroded some of the minerals until there was chemical components that, despite everything we know about physics and chemistry, kept building larger molecules until they formed larger molecule systems that created protein machines that came together into organelles that all found each other and started life. It literally is the first chapter of the story. So it's not technically part of the biological process of evolution, but it is the first chapter of the evolutionary story. And the distinction should be made, but it doesn't mean that you don't start talking about the story from the first chapter. Without the first chapter, the rest of it doesn't happen. And if we acknowledge that that first chapter is impossible, as everything we know about chemistry says it is, well, then you can't start off as an atheist going, well, evolution happened. Well, no, because we have that first chapter that shows it can't, unless, God intervenes and makes it happen, which again, which is why my definition starts off with evolution as an unguided natural process, because I'm not saying, well, if God intervenes and steps in and does stuff, then things evolve in that sense. I'm saying, look, let's just say nature left to nature. Well, chemistry says the story can't start, and so once you actually get to the part where living cells are reproducing, you already have to pass a literal impossibility to get there, so you can't use that as evidence for atheism.
Okay.
So that's right.
Thank you for clarifying that one. I'm sure he'll correct when again if and when he gets a chance to see this, depending on if you feel like posting it. But no, I appreciate you clarifying that.
Well, it's going to be a week or two before I can edit it, but as long as it's okay with you, it'll go up at some point. It's just next week won't happen.
And feel free to. Again, the reason I do this is because I want there to be a dialogue about this, no matter how much people clearly, for some reason, don't want to see opposing opinions. I would rather people be able to see this. Me look good, bad, right, wrong, it doesn't matter.
I appreciate that about you. That's good.
Well, that's all I have for as far as now. If you're still up to it, I'll hit you up in a couple months. If again I come up with any other things, questions or think about anything.
Sure, I'm happy to talk anytime, except this next week. It's just too stupid busy. Which I actually have to be at work in half an hour, so this is a good time to end. But so if you're content, I've had a good time talking to you. Always happy to answer questions. And thanks for following the channel. It's always good to see your comments in my videos, because you're one of those people who leaves helpful and useful comments, and I appreciate that. It unbalances the trolls a little and makes it a little more worth going down into the comments.
They make my life a little better, to be fair.
All right. If you have any other questions, feel free to hit me up on email or in the comments, and I am here to help anytime.
Sweet. You have a good rest of your day, mate.
Thank you. Remember, Jesus loves you.